Hi, everyone. Welcome to the June 4th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're not going to do the typical recap show, looking back at last weekend's stakes races. Instead, we're going to do a little preview of next weekend's Belmont Stakes card, focusing on the main event, the Belmont Stakes, and we'll also take a look at some of the undercard races. So I'll just go right ahead and welcome my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Craig, how are you thinking about this Belmont Stakes? Do you think it's really just the two-horse race that a lot of people are billing it to be?
I would say out of those two, they probably have about an 80% chance to win the race. I think I tried to look at some of the others and make a case. And a few of them wouldn't shock me. I still think it would be quite a reach to think they can beat the top two.
Yeah, as I look more at the race, I really do think that War of Will and Tacitus, the two favorites, they look pretty strong in this event. And I guess we can sort of dive into the field by just starting with the pace of the race and talking about the pace projector a little bit. We do have some of the contenders up in the past performances on TimeformUS.com with a preliminary pace projector. And unlike a lot of these three-year-old races, this Belmont is not predicted to feature a fast pace. It feels like almost all of the three-year-old races we've analyzed so far have been predicted to feature a fast pace. That's not the case in the Belmont, unsurprisingly, when you look at the field, because there's just not a ton of speed in this race. Jovia, who is expected to enter as a definite starter now, he's predicted to be the likely leader with War of Will sitting second. And I would assume that's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think he's much of a contender in the race, no matter what kind of fractions he's able to set. Not that that's any earth-shattering news. I'm sure he's going to be a huge price. Just one thing to keep in mind is the races get longer, particularly on dirt, on turf as well. The longer the race, the more it becomes a tactical race, kind of up to the jockeys. So I kind of take these pace projectors with a grain of salt when we get up to a mile and a half. I think the leader is dead on here. I think the positions are pretty good, but trying to guess whether it's going to be fast or slow for that particular distance is really a tough thing to do ahead of time. I do agree with you that it doesn't look like a whole lot of speed on paper, so I would expect an average pace at best.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends just on how these horses adapt to the mile-and-a-half distance and setting a slower tempo, because sometimes, like we saw with Restoring Hope last year, these horses can get a little rank in the early going. Just they're not used to kind of relaxing out of the gate the way that the jockeys want them to do in the Belmont Stakes. We'll start with War of Will of the main contenders. His Preakness win, I thought, was fine. We talked about his trip and how well it worked out for Tyler Gaffalione and the connections in that race. Just everything went right for him in terms of saving ground and getting through at the right time. As I look at this race more, it does really feel like War of Will is going to trip out and just sit that perfect up-close stalking trip like he's had in the prior two. And I really just think it comes down to, does he get the distance or not?
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say the exact same thing. It's just a matter of if he can get the distance. He's not going to be pace compromised. He certainly has enough tactical speed that he can be right up on the front. Doesn't look like it's going to be too fast. But, if for some reason Jovia runs off or somebody else presses him and makes it fast, it's not like he's a horse who has to be right up on the front. He's ran fine. He's able to relax. So it's just a matter of if he can get the distance. And I'm curious what you think about that when it comes to his breeding.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a son of Warfront, you don't really think of those kinds of horses as getting a mile and a half on the dirt. But he does have that real great stamina foundation on the bottom side of his pedigree. That he's got that Sadler's Wells dam. The dam has produced Tacticus. I don't want to mess that name up. Not Tacitus. Tacticus, a horse that won going, I think, 1 mile and 5/8 in a stakes race at Belmont Park on the dirt a number of years ago. So there is real stamina breeding on the dam side of his pedigree. It's just really a matter of if he's inherited that, because he's got that great turn of foot. He's got plenty of speed. We've seen that in many of his races. It's just going to be a real unknown as he approaches that final quarter mile once they turn into the stretch at Belmont. And also, I think it is a valid concern, or at least something to keep in mind, that he is the only horse who's competed in all three legs of the Triple Crown. You really don't know until the day of the race what kind of a toll that's taken. I know Mark Casse has not worked in between these last two starts in an attempt to keep him fresh. At this point, I think you just want to try to keep weight on these horses to make sure that they maintain their form. But it's a little bit of a guess how he's going to handle it, because a lot of these three-year-olds have never faced that kind of challenge before.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a little bit of a negative, at least, that he hasn't worked him. We haven't seen him. following the Belmont through the years, usually I at least get out for a decent breeze in between. So I'm not going to pretend to be a expert on workouts, but I will look at it as a little bit of a negative. And the same with him being the only one that's running all three races. They've clearly been tough races, particularly the Derby for him, where he certainly faced plenty of traffic and adversity. So, if it takes even just a little bit out of him and he doesn't recover, he's going to have his hands full with Tacitus.
Speaking of workouts, the one horse that seems to be generating a little bit of buzz based on his works recently is Tacitus, who's likely to be either the favorite or the second choice. I was making the morning line for this race last night and into this morning, and I was kind of going back and forth between who I wanted to make the favorite. I changed my mind this morning, and I think I've come to a decision. I'll put that out later, but it's going to be very close, I would imagine. Tacitus, a lot of people have liked his recent workouts. Just seems like the light bulb's gone off with this horse. Like, he just really is more in the bridle in his workouts. Like, he's just he needed more encouragement earlier in the year to complete these drills, and he just seems to be doing it more willingly these days. He's just the kind of horse that seems to be improving with every start. I thought his Derby was fine. I don't think he had the kind of tough trip that some people saw. He was a little rank in the early going and maybe not quite settled. But all things considered, I didn't think he had any major adversity to overcome. He just seems like the kind of horse that's supposed to get the mile-and-a-half distance. If you can say that about any of these 3-year-olds, he seems like the one that might be best suited to it.
Yeah, he's going to be the horse I wind up going with in here. But I agree with you. His Derby trip, as far as Derby trips go, it was fine. He didn't get a whole lot of traffic. But I think he did get caught back of, when the race slowed down a bit after that opening half mile. He kind of got caught a little bit far behind and just had left himself a little bit much to do. I think he'll appreciate the distance. He's shown tactical speed. He's shown a lot of grit. And I just like that he's had a little more time than more of will. I wouldn't want to be the morning line maker as you are in here, because I'm with you. I think it could come down to either one of these two, just, a few $1,000s in the end to see which one's going to be the favorite.
My one concern with Tacitus is that we might be building him up a little bit too much. I feel like he's become such a consensus other horse in this race, and it's based on his consistency. I think it's not based on the idea that he's faster than these horses, because he's just not. I mean, there are other horses that have run just as fast as him. They just haven't done it on multiple occasions like he has. So I think it really does come down to whether or not he's improving off his prior form, because he's going to have to win this race, or to win it as decisively as some people think he might. So I'm a little wary of him in that sense, because he doesn't have some major speed figure edge. But in the Belmont Stakes, I know that might not matter as much as in other races.
Yeah, it's true. We never really know. I did a study on this a couple years ago to see how the speed figures come back. And the Belmont was generally the slowest of the 3 Triple Crowns. Not really a surprise. I don't think most of these horses are bred to run this far anymore. They're certainly not trained to run this far for the most part. So, I think this one settled in the low 120s, where the others were up in the mid 120s. So not really sure what to expect in this one. Like I said, I do like his grit. He's overcome adversity a couple times in the past. He's shown he's able to run in traffic, which probably won't be a problem in here. But I'm not expecting any kind of blowout win or anything like that. But I think he's probably the most likely winner.
I do want to touch upon some of the other contenders. One in particular that I think is going to attract some support, and who I think is kind of intriguing in this race, is Master Fencer, who's making his first start since an interesting Kentucky Derby where he was just flying up the rail at the end. Watching the Derby back, he's the one horse that I could make an argument might have done a lot better had he just gotten through earlier, because he really was waiting up in traffic around the far turn. And once Julian Leroux found a clear path for him, he was finishing with so much run. I mean, he really had energy left across the wire. Whether that translates to him getting the 1.5 miles, I think that remains to be seen. It's just kind of a guess. He is a horse that they started out in his career debut going 1.25 miles on the turf in Japan. So I think they always thought he's a horse that would want to go these longer marathon distances. What do you make of this horse? He's kind of the wild card in this race, because you could make the argument that he's one of the major players, but it's just based on one race, really.
Yeah, and it was an eye-catching move. I mean, as you're watching the Derby, if you just kind of don't focus in on the leaders and you take a broader view, you can't help but notice how much faster he's running than all the rest of the horses through the stretch. As you said, the distance is a question. His lack of any real early speed at all is a question. And, we've seen many times over the years at this longer distance of a mile and a half, horses like him don't often have that same finishing kick. With him, it's just a big question mark. My only real negative on him is I think he's probably going to wind up being the third choice. He's probably going to wind up being the wise guy horses, they like to say. And while I do think he has some chance in here, I think he's probably going to be over bet compared to his real chance of winning.
Yeah, I do have him as the third choice on the morning line, a distant one, but I have him as the third choice. He is a deep closer. Even if you watch his races in Japan, even those last two stakes races he ran in the Hyacinth and the Fukuru, he was just way back early and made one of these big late runs at the end. He doesn't have any turn of foot, really. He's just this grinding horse who tries to pass tired runners at the end, and he might pass a lot of tired runners in the Belmont Stakes. It's just I wonder if he's quite fast enough to do it. I think he's a contender in this race. Don't get me wrong. I just have some reservations, as you do. Everfast finished second in the Preakness with a big late run. Another deep closer. Was that just a fluke? Can we rely on that race at all, looking at this Belmont?
I would kind of look at it and just say Everfast got a perfect trip, and he ran about as good as we could expect. He certainly surprised me. He surprised most everyone, I think, that day with his second place finish. But I'm not going to overrate the race. I'm not, trying to say it was a fluke and knock it. I just think he's a horse that fell into a perfect trip. He was way off a fast pace. He saved a whole bunch of ground. Came up the rail, which we've talked about. I don't think it was any particular advantage that day, but some people do seem to believe that. We can definitely say it wasn't a negative to be on the rail. So just saving ground, perfect trip off a hot pace, and not really one I want in here.
Yeah, I think he prompts an interesting question, which is how much do you rely on the Preakness form against the Kentucky Derby form? Because I do think it's worth pointing out that the Preakness was kind of a hungry field. It was not really the kind of classy race that we saw in the Kentucky Derby. And maybe that's a little bit of an indictment of the race that War of Will ran, even though he ran a fast speed figure. He wasn't beating the kind of field that a lot of these horses that ran in the Kentucky Derby were facing. So Everfast, I do think he still has quite a bit to prove, because while the Preakness does carry the prestige of being a Triple Crown race, I don't think that he deserves the kind of credit that you normally would get for finishing second in the Preakness. So I'm a little bit wary of him. I don't think that this Belmont Stakes necessarily sets up for a deep closer. And even if I was going to take a deep closer, there are about 2 or 3 other horses that I would prefer over him. So I'm a little bit against him, but I understand how some people might be somewhat impressed by just the nature of the late rally that he put in last time.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I was going to take a deep closer, I'd be on Master Fencer before him, and even maybe Sir Winston, who I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a few minutes.
Yeah, I actually want to move right on to the horses coming out of the Peter Pan, Intrepid Heart and Sir Winston. I've seen a lot of people giving Intrepid Heart a pass for the Peter Pan and kind of honing in on him as one of the alternatives that they could focus on in the Belmont Stakes. I don't know. He didn't do a heck of a lot of running in the Peter Pan, and maybe you could say a mile and an eighth is just too short for him, as funny as that sounds. And the mile and a half is going to bring out his best, because, of course, he is the half brother to Commissioner, who was second by a narrow margin to Tonalist in the Belmont Stakes a number of years ago. And he is a son of Tapit, as is Tacitus, who has just had a ton of success siring winners of the Belmont Stakes. But is he really going to get that much faster, stretching out to a mile and a half? I don't know.
Yeah, he feels like a total reach to me. We've never had him particularly fast on our speed figures, even when he won his first couple races. He actually ran a career top on our numbers last time out when he was beaten 6 lengths by Global Campaign. So the only real hope you have here is he's just a horse who loves a mile and a half and would improve greatly. It's not a venture I'm willing to take with my money. I just don't see it.
I know Todd Pletcher's been very high on him throughout. He's talked about him as his Belmont Stakes horse for a long time, even going all the way back to his maiden victory. So I respect Todd Pletcher, and if he sees something in this horse, I think you have to take that seriously. I feel like he might be an underlay in this race. I'm not totally buying it. And, I could see a situation where Sir Winston's actually a higher price. And I think Sir Winston's a legitimate contender in this race because he ran a respectable speed figure in the Peter Pan last time. That was not a race that just fell into his lap. The pace was honest, but it wasn't a particularly fast pace. And he put in a really impressive closing split. I think I tweeted after the race, Track had him coming on his last 3 furlongs in 35-1, which even though it was a fast racetrack, that's a notable final closing split on a dirt surface. Maybe that doesn't translate to a 1.5 miles, but Sir Winston is bred as well as anybody to go the 1.5 mile distance in this race, being by Awesome Again out of a Fleet Alex mare with some stamina on the dam side. I think Sir Winston's kind of an interesting horse who's flying under the radar a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's a horse that made up almost 9 lengths in the last 3 furlongs of the Peter Pan, and it's not like some horse had a 5-length lead and packed it in. Global Campaign was right up there near the front and went on the win, but Sir Winston was making up real ground on him. Now, again, it's the Belmont. It's kind of a crapshoot if these horses really want to go that far. But he's a horse that's shown, he can sit a little bit closer than some of the others like Master Fencer we talked about in here. And if he can keep that same kick, I could certainly see him being a factor late.
Yeah, I don't know exactly who I'm going to pick yet. I really just want to survey the field once it's actually drawn. But I will say he's a horse I'm definitely considering because I was impressed by his last race. He's got to repeat it, unlike Tacitus, who's done that multiple times, run competitive speed figures. Sir Winston and some of the others have only done it once. But these 3-year-olds can improve at this time of year. So he's a horse that I have my eye on as I'm handicapping this race. As for the others, I have trouble making a case for a lot of the other horses. I know some people are a little interested in Spinoff, others in Tax, Bourbon War, if you want to give him one more shot. Is there anybody else that you have your eye on, or are they all just a couple of some of these other contenders?
No, I mean, the only one I'd even give the slightest a nod is Tax, and that's just if you put a line through his Kentucky Derby and think he can get back to his wood in earlier races. Maybe see how he looks coming out, see if he's taking any action. But even in his case, he'd have to be a good 40 to 50-1 before I'd even take a small action bet on him.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's going to be that high of a price in this field, but I guess you never know. And I also don't like that Danny Gargan was kind of going back and forth about whether or not to even run him in the race because he wasn't sure how the horse was training. That's never a good sign when connections are openly saying that. Also, just one more comment on the horse's training. I know Master Fencer had a slight incident this week where he bobbled a little bit at the end of a workout. Apparently, everything's fine with him. Personally, I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in that. Master Fencer's just kind of a goofy horse. It looked like he might have reacted to something or stumbled a little bit. It sounds like the horse is sound, so I'm not really worrying about that. We can move on to some of the undercard stakes races because I think we've exhausted all of the contenders in the Belmont Stakes. I'm looking forward to a lot of these races, and probably none more so than the Met Mile, where you've got 5 really high-profile contenders coming into the race. And unlike a lot of situations where you have these great matchups, somehow all of these horses are coming in off wins. We rarely see that when you get top horses coming together in a race like this. But McKinsey, Mitoli, Firenze Fire, Cold Front, and Thunder Snow are all coming off impressive victories. And they'll be meeting up in the Met Mile. Do you have any feelings on this race, or who are you looking forward to seeing the most?
I'm really looking forward to seeing Mitoli. He's, to me, had the look of a horse who just fit this race like a glove. He's certainly going to face the toughest competition he's ever faced in here. But I think he's the goods. Some of the others, I got a little question mark. Thunder Snow, this might be a little short for him. I'm not sure he wants one turn. And you could maybe even say the same for McKenzie. It's a little tough to say at this point. It wouldn't shock me if he turned back and ran well. And I think post position is going to play a role as well. You get this many good horses. I don't think you want to be buried on the inside where you can either, get trapped behind horses or you're forced to go. And then you kind of are the target for the entire race, which is a long way to be in that role in a 1-turn mile.
Yeah, I have kind of the opposite view on Mitoli and McKinsey. I'm a little more confident in McKinsey getting the distance. I have always been of the opinion that McKinsey is not really a classic 1.25 mile kind of horse, and I think this 1-turn mile is actually perfect for him. He handled 7 furlongs in the Malibu, and I think 1 mile and a 16th is arguably his best distance, and I think this 1-turn mile is going to hit him right between the eyes. Mitoli still has something to prove for me going a mile. I know he finished up strongly in the Churchill Downs Stakes. Don't get me wrong. He got the 7 furlongs that day, and I know that was a big hurdle for him because he had been so good going 6 furlongs in his prior starts, and he got the extra furlong. Stretching out to the mile, though, that's another hurdle. And also, Promises Fulfilled is listed as a probable entrant for this race. And if Promises Fulfilled is in there along with Mitole, that they could hook up early and create a pretty honest pace. And I just wonder if Mitole can overcome that kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I just tend to think that he showed me last time. I don't think he's a horse that really has to be part of the pace. Sure, he's going to be right up on a track. And that's why I would definitely temper my enthusiasm if he drew inside. But if he can draw outside and get that stalking trip, just like he did at Churchill, I think he's good. Now, that said, I mean, he's going to be a short price. I'm not even sure I would bet Mitole, and maybe I would take him on under the right circumstances. But I think we've talked about by far the two most likely winners. I know people are talking about how deep it is of a field, but I do think these two have a significant edge over the rest of the other three.
I agree with that. I'm always afraid of Jason Service. I think Firenze Fire could pop up with a gigantic performance and win this race. I wouldn't rely on that possibility because I never know how these horses are going to go from one race to the next. And Firenze Fire hasn't put together back-to-back performances like that. And he was so good in his prior start in the Run Happy. I'm scared of him, though. The two horses coming from Dubai, I agree. They might just need a race coming back off a bit of a layoff. But, I mean, Thunder Snow, he's just he's been around for a little while, and he just seems to run in any circumstance. So he's a horse that you always have to respect as well. I'm also looking forward to the Manhattan quite a bit, which will be run as the race right before the Belmont. Bricks and Mortar, great to see him show up there. He's really danced all the major dances so far this year, having won the Grade 1 turf race on the Kentucky Derby undercard, as well as the Pegasus World Cup turf earlier in the year. He's got to get the 1.25 miles in the Manhattan, but I don't think that's going to be a major hurdle for him.
No, I don't either. I mean, I think this race probably going to come down to almost being the Chad Brown Invitational, where most of the main contenders are going to come from his barn, outside of maybe Channel Maker, I think, is being pointed here. But Bricks and Mortar has been the real deal this year, and a win here. I know it's really early, and I don't want to get in too much into that horse of the year thing, but he'd probably put himself right at the forefront of that if he could win here. The others, Robert Bruce, he hasn't looked like quite the same horse to me as last couple times out. Granted, one was at the Breeders' Cup in a race that's probably too long for him. The last time was on turf, which wasn't as firm as he likes, and he did have a bit of a tough trip, being much closer than normal to what we have as a fast pace. But it's going to be a puzzle. We got Olympico coming in, who first time over here beat, I believe it was in the same race with Robert Bruce where he won. And kind of an oddball trip for him reading his past performances. And then I think even Raging Bull's pointed here. He's the one I know you probably like a little more than I do. I'm not sure this is a good spot for him, but I'm curious to see him run as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like Raging Bull going 1.25 miles. I've always thought he's better going like a flat mile or 1.16 miles. I don't really know if I like him going this far. Robert Bruce is the horse that I have my eye on a little bit in this race. I'm not saying I'm going to pick him necessarily, but he is in better form than it seems, as you were saying. He just hasn't gotten the kind of firm turf course that he really likes in his recent starts. And two of those races were at 1.5 miles. And I do think 1.5 miles is just a little bit too far for him. 1.25 miles is the perfect distance. He didn't get the right trip in the Manhattan last year, but I do think he's good enough to win a race at this level, as he showed in the Arlington Million. And last time out in the Fort Marcy, that was just a bog at Belmont Park. So much rain had fallen, and he was way too close to that pace. Robert Bruce was trading well prior to that race, and he's going to run a lot better in this Manhattan, I think. Whether that means he can beat his stablemate, Bricks and Mortar, I don't know. But I think he's of the Trad Brown horses, I think he's the biggest foe. Another race that I'm definitely looking forward to, probably the 1-to-1 matchup that I'm most anticipating on the Belmont Stakes undercard, is the Ogden Phipps, where Midnight Bisou is facing off against the up-and-coming mare Come Dancing. Really interested to see not only how the public bets this race, but how these two actually measure up on the racetrack.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. I don't know who else is going to be entered in this one. I've only looked at the top two so far, but clearly two of the top horses in the division. The 1-turn mile, Come Dancing should really like this. She's already proven it. She ran that huge 134 TimeformUS speed figure 2 races back, which is something Midnight Bisou hasn't even come close to in her career, while winning a ton of races. But, if Come Dancing is able to reproduce that effort, I don't think she can be touched here, even by a horse like Midnight Bisou.
Well, one of your favorites is actually entered for this race, or supposedly going to be entering this race. Escape Clause, the horse that ran Midnight Bisou to that nose decision in the Apple Blossom. She could keep Come Dancing Honest on the front end because she's another horse with a little bit of tactical speed. Electric Forest is also listed as possible for this race. She was the wire-to-wire winner of the Double Dog Dare at Keeneland. So there could be a little bit of pace to keep Come Dancing Honest on the front end, but I feel like if Come Dancing runs the kinds of races that we've seen out of her the last two times, Midnight Bisou is going to have a struggle on her hands because she's got to get a little bit faster. I know the mile on the 16th is probably the perfect distance for Midnight Bisou, and maybe the one turn is really what she wants to do. I've always thought that for her, like the one turn mile would be great for her. But I wonder if she can overcome a horse that's in the kind of form that Come Dancing is.
Right. I'd probably be a little more leery of Come Dancing if this race was outside New York, but with it being at Belmont, I just think she's going to be. I'm hoping that Midnight Bisou gets bet really heavily and that we can get some value on Come Dancing. Whether it happens is yet to be seen. Sometimes I think bettors are. I don't give them the credit they deserve. We shall see. It's going to be a heck of a race, and this is probably the race I'm looking for most forward to after the Met Mile.
Yeah, I know, because Midnight Bisou's got that name recognition and the class, all of that clout. But if you look at the speed figures, I think it's pretty clear cut. And I know some people don't always rely on the speed figures totally, but I think this is a situation where you have to pay attention to that. A couple other stakes that I'm looking forward to personally. I want to see Rushing Fall run in the Just a Game earlier on the card. I think the mile is perfect for her, and she just looked so good winning the Jenny Wiley last time. She's just got this versatile running style where she can go to the lead, come from off the pace. She's just really hard to beat at this point.
Yeah, she's one of those horses with early speed that can also finish off a race, which is really dangerous on turf. I loved how she finished her last time. She only won by a length, but it was well measured. I don't think she was ever really in any danger. I'm not sure exactly who she'll be facing in here, but I'm sure she's going to be a heavy favorite. But I'm looking forward to seeing her run.
Yeah, they're not horses in the same league as her. I mean, Beau Recall, who we saw win the Distaff Turf Mile at Churchill Downs, she's supposed to come. Daddy is a Legend, who's also coming out of that race. Environs, Got Stormy. I just don't think that race was quite at the level of Rushing Fall's Jenny Wiley. We'll see. I know it got a respectable speed figure. In my opinion, though, Rushing Fall is going to be awfully tough to beat in that race. I'm also looking forward to the final turf race on the Belmont Stakes undercard, the Jaipur, where World of Trouble is going to face off against the two-time winner of this race, Disco Partner. I know Disco Partner is a Belmont Park specialist. He loves 6 furlongs as opposed to those 5 and 5.5 furlong turf sprints. I anticipate him being pretty tough in this race, but boy, World of Trouble's in great form right now.
He is. I mean, it's really hard to knock World of Trouble. He's shown he can read. He doesn't have to go fast. He can win on turf or dirt. I don't think he's shown the 7 furlongs isn't a problem. Disco Partner's a bit of a question mark. I mean, his form's a bit muddied up with those shorter races. He maybe doesn't quite look like the same horse, but if you're ever going to give him a chance, it has to be here at Belmont going to 7 furlongs.
Yeah, Disco Partners never really run that well at Keeneland. I know Christophe Clement takes him there almost every year to run, and it just seems like it never really works out for him. He is such a Belmont specialist. I think he's like 9 for 14 at Belmont Park. He's won just 11 times in his career, so this is really where he does his best running. And if the turf is firm, he loves that as well. So
no doubt. He set the world record, I believe, if I remember, on the same course, did he not?
Yes, that insane 105 and change 6 furlongs. I don't know if we'll see that again because I'm not sure he's still in that kind of form. But World of Trouble might be able to run that fast. We'll see. I know these Belmont turf courses can get very fast when there's not a lot of rain in the forecast, and there really isn't any rain in the forecast this week ahead of the Belmont Stakes card. So that could be the case. Any other stakes that you're looking forward to on the undercard? I know those were the ones that I was really anticipating seeing.
No, the only other horse I wanted to mention, because I was looking over the cards from Thursday and Friday, which are loaded with stakes races as well, the True North, some others mixed in there. But Newspaper of Record makes a return on Thursday, and I believe it's a Wonder Again stakes on one of the early races on the card. So not really a very good betting race. She looks to have the field over a barrel on paper, just at a quick glance. But I'm just curious how she's going to rebound from her first defeat and seeing if she's progressed from her 2-year-old form, or if maybe she's just one of those fillies that was, a little more mature than her classmates and hasn't really developed.
Yeah, I actually made her 1-5 on the morning line, which I rarely do, but it just seems like there's nowhere else to go in that race from a handicapping standpoint because her main rival is her stablemate, Cambier Park. I'll be interested to see how they ride her because she had been so headstrong in the Edgewood last time, and I wonder if Chad Brown will try to experiment with using Cambier Park as a bit of a target for her, or if they're just going to let her go to the front once again, because I know sometimes she gets a little too headstrong when she does that. That's just the interesting thing to watch, because it really is a public workout. I don't think any of these horses are going to beat her. It's just, how does she accomplish the victory? Because I think there are still some question marks about her distance abilities heading on to a race like the Belmont Oaks, because she'd have to get the 1.25 miles that day, and I think that's still a little bit up in the air. As for some other stakes, Friday's card is awesome. I was just finishing it this morning, putting together the final morning lines. It's a really great card on Friday. As you said, the True North is an excellent race. The return of Catalina Cruiser, he's coming for the race, but Whitmore's in there too. Duchère, who was so impressive winning the Tom Fool back in March. That's a race I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's loaded. I think there's 3 grade 2s. We also have the Bed of Roses, which is a grade 3, and the ever exciting Belmont Gold Cup. We don't get to see horses run 2 miles. I only say that slightly in jest. I actually love these kind of races. They're an interesting handicapping challenge. We definitely have a few Euro shippers in here at least. They always try to take advantage of this distance we're not used to. So I always like seeing how these races play out. Not a big fan of them as a figure maker. I do try to do these marathon races. I make figures for them, but they wind up being more of class or almost race ratings and speed figures.
Yeah, the Belmont Gold Cup this year is actually a really fascinating race. Last year, you had Call to Mind, who just seemed like a little bit classier than the American horses coming in, and he was the winner of that race. There are European runners in the race this year, but they don't seem to have that kind of class edge like Call to Mind had last year. There are some American horses like Arklow, who was just second in the Man of War, as well as the New York-bred Red Knight, who actually already has won going to 2 miles. He did that at Gulfstream Park last winter. They seem pretty formidable, so I'm interested to see how the public bets that race and how that race gets run, because it seems like a good matchup between the local horses and the foreign runners. Also, the Chad Brown has 2 in the New York. I know Homerique, who got a really big TimeformUS speed figure from us last time out in the Beaugay. She's running once again against Competition of Ideas, who she beat in that race. Looking forward to that matchup once again. And just a ton of great racing. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We're looking forward to seeing it, looking forward to handicapping and betting these cards. I should mention that we will be doing the TimeformUS Belmont package this year, where I think you'll be writing a pace piece. Is that correct, Craig?
Yeah, I'm going to do the Met Mile this year. Normally, I do the Triple Crown races for these. For the Triple Crown races, for the Breeders' Cup, I tend to stick to the sprint races. But for this package, I'm going to do the Met Mile.
And I'll be writing analysis of all of the stakes races on Saturday at Belmont, horse-by-horse rundown of every single stakes race. So I'll be drinking a lot of coffee between now and then to get through all of that. But really looking forward to just diving into these races and putting together some multi-race tickets as well, because I think these are going to be some fascinating pick 4, pick 5 sequences to analyze. So, Craig, great to talk about these races as always. And I'm especially looking forward to next week when we can recap all of this stakes action. So thanks for listening, guys, this week. You can listen to us, as always, on drf.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, SoundCloud. Just search for the Daily Racing Form podcasts and the TimeformUS Pacecast. Thanks for listening, guys, this week, and we'll talk to you again next week.